one and all within this period of time in which we are in the pandemic, but also the things in which we are assured of and assuring ourselves of is the fact that democracy will live. As we are gathered here, we will be having some wonderful discourse and interchange about our UUJO vote. We will be engaging with others as far as how we could increase voter registration, but also I would like to say our voter education and also our voter participation. So in these various ways, this is how we could help and also serve as a protection for our future elections.
The most common way women give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. It's a quote by Alice Walker. What is liberation? Are you free? Are you holding back? What are you afraid of? Which side are you on, my people? Which side are you on? Have you ever been silent when you knew you shouldn't? Do you know your heroic self? Can you set that self free? For in an exploitive society, there are always two sides, and at some point, one must choose. Anne Braden. Can you talk about rape? Can you talk about power? Can you confront contempt, indifference, ignorance? Who is your heroic self? What would she say? What would she do? Would she stand quietly by? Would she hold hands and cross to the other side? How many would she bring with her? Would she break the silence? Which side are you on, my people? Which side are you on? Can you, do you argue against injustice, inequalities, imprisonment? Do you see racism? Do you call out traditions that enable racism? Can you share your fury over systems that steal liberty from millions of Black men, women, the impoverished? Do people ask you, which side are you on, my people? Which side are you on? Are you free, really free? Do you know your fears? Have you faced them? Have you survived disaster? Have you felt and fought trauma? Speak truth. Speak truth to yourself. Speak truth to power. Know how close your own imprisonment is. Stretch free. Bring some with you. Acknowledge the truth and power of your pain. Set yourself and others free. We have to own the fears that we have of each other, and then in some practical way, some daily way, figure out how to see people differently than the way we were brought up to. Alice Walker. Bridge the divides with truth, with self-knowledge of the good and the ugly, the strength and the cowardice, and keep going. Someone who embodies that is Edwin Fuller. He's a criminal justice organizer with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative based in the Dayton area. His professional background originated in the technology industry and grassroots entrepreneurship. He's a veteran, proudly served in the Marine Corps, and has a BA in history from San Diego University. He's a member of the UU Church of the Larger Fellowship. Edwin seeks to shape a society, along with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, a society free of economic oppression, racism and discrimination, in which every person lives in a safe and healthy environment, is respected and included, and has agency over the decisions that shape their lives. In the larger context, the OOC and Edwin work with Faith in Action, a nationwide organization, and the burning bush issue that brings him to this work is a commitment to criminal justice reform and ending mass incarceration. He is driven to do what he can to create change and seek an effective and just way that will meet the needs of justice for the incarcerated, as well as the needs of those who populate our neighborhoods. He was born in Texas, raised in San Diego, lives in Dayton since '98. He's a parent of 4 incredible children and the brother of 3 siblings, Outside of his professional endeavors, he runs marathons to fundraise for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And as he likes to say, let justice roll.
Well, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I kind of want to talk a little bit about here. Samuel and John had asked me to share something with everybody, and I think a few weeks ago, we were part of a call where we were talking about one of the most important things is how do we as an organization show up in this time? How are we effective as an organization in engaging with congregations and with our community at large out there? And so I will basically, probably about the next, I guess about 10, 15 minutes, take a little bit of time and try and share some of that with you. And I hope that my technology is going to work. This is my first PowerPoint with this program, so I'm gonna hope that it works here. But what we're doing is, hold on, let me share my screen. And pop, and share. Go. All right, I think we're all here. What we're going to talk about here is really something called organizing models. When we look at how we as an organization show up in our community, the question that we really want to ask is how can we best show up? How can we most effectively reach out and be in touch with, I said, congregations and ultimately with people that are out there. And we look across the spectrum of organizing. There are basically 5 types of organizations that are involved. You have those who are social service oriented, those who are self-help, education and information, those who are involved in advocacy. And then we have a final group, which is community organizing. And these are kind of structured in a way as we're going to walk through each one of them, and we're going to look at, talk about different examples. We're going to see where, the question is, what are these type of organizations that are currently present? Where do they draw their power from? And really, the question I think in front of us is where do we see ourselves on that ladder? Where do we see ourselves being able to reach out and effectively engage? So this is really, as I said, kind of structured on a ladder of engagement with a group of people here. The first level is social service. Now, a social service organization is really kind of geared around meeting a need. They're not necessarily concerned with the why of the need, but they're really more focused on actually providing a direct service in hand. Now, I don't know if you can, I'm not sure what the technical aspects of that are, but maybe we just think of what examples of that would be. Maybe things such as a food bank is a direct service. Something that, not like the United Way, something providing clothing or any type of direct service that is being provided it's a social service kind of organization. But the question we need to ask is, where is their power? Where do they derive that from? Is it something that are they actually affecting the system and the structures in place that are causing the need for the problem? And I think as we walk through this, we can use the proverbial example of babies floating down the river. We've got babies floating down the river. A social service organization is going to go out there, get the babies out of the water, bring them in and take care of them. And that's the limit really of their power and where they're able to show up, is by providing that direct service. Also, we might want to think about what are the limitations of that type of organization. Again, when you're providing a direct service, you're not really addressing the why of the need or the structure that brings that need into being, and what might be done to change that. The next level or type of organization is self-help. These type of organizations, they're about self-actualization. Not as much concern with, again, not as much concern with the structures or the policies that are in place, but they're focused on actually helping the individual to help themselves. How can they meet that need of an individual who, number one, wants to help themselves, who wants to be engaged with that. But again, it's something that's very central to that individual and their problem or their challenge. What might be an example of this? Things that come to mind are, and I can't see, if you have any comments, I can't see the chat with here. So I'm gonna assume I will come back to that when I can, I guess, unshare the screen. But examples of this would be like AA, any other type, other things that are working with self-actualization, self-help with this. The question again is, what is their power? Well, if we look at what is their power to change the structures in place, not a lot, because the individuals who are there and individuals may come together, those who have a common problem may come together as a group, but they are coming together not as a group to affect any kind of change. They're coming together as a group seeking, mutual support as they work on their problem. Education or information type of organization. These type of organizations provide information to a constituent base. Now this particular type of institution is really more, as I said, it's closer to understanding the structural implication of the systems. These are like think tanks. These are like those organizations who are devoted to studying a problem, studying a type of, whether it's education or whether it's a type of criminal justice reform, or whether it's dealing with food insecurity or dealing with a ton of other type of issues. They study it, they gather information, they do the think tank work, and they may distribute the information. Where is their power again when it comes to affecting change? Well, a lot of their power rests in the fact that yes, they're finding the information and they are the experts. So in many ways, they are a resource for those who are doing other work to address the problems, but they themselves as an organization are not out there actually engaged in changing the structures that are in place. Fourth type of organization are advocacy organizations. These organizations, obviously, as it says, that they represent and they advocate on behalf of a group that cannot represent themselves. And that's, obviously those are usually directly impacted people. What we find a lot of times is that those who are directly impacted are not able to come forth and advocate powerfully on their own. I mean, I think somebody comes to mind easily are the undocumented immigrants who are in a fearful situation and feeling endangered. They are extremely reticent to do anything that's going to put them on the skyline. So an advocacy group is someone that's going to speak on behalf. The thing about this particular type of group is that the strategies, as I said, are normally developed by what's called, we think of it as a small group of, we might think smart people. It's not, it's a group of those who are motivated to address the problem and to deal with it. They are motivated to want to make changes, but they are developing the strategy. It's really kind of going into a neighborhood and saying, in some cases, saying that we see this as the problem. We want to help. We're coming with a strategy. We're coming with a solution, and we're going to tell you how to fix it. And that's not always, in many cases, that's how they all work. That's not how they all work, but in a lot of cases, that's how it can come across. Where is the power in that group? Well, the power in that group really rests with the small group of people who are creating and developing the strategies. They're the ones who are accessing the information. When we talked about the educational type of organization, they're accessing the experts. They're developing the strategy, and they are taking it to those who are directly impacted, or this organization itself is speaking on behalf of them. Where is their power? The power is, as we said, it's in the organization itself. It's not necessarily in those who are directly impacted. Final type of group is community organizing. Obviously, now I've got a little bit of bias in this because I'm an organizer. So just transparency there. But the difference really, but there is a distinct difference in community organizing, what we refer to as community organizing, versus the other type of organizations. They do not advocate on behalf of anyone. In community organizing, we have a saying that do not do for someone what they can do for themselves. Okay, those who are directly impacted are at the center of the effort. It's not a think tank saying, well, let's put together the strategy. That doesn't mean that they are not accessed as a resource, but it's actually going out and working with those who are directly impacted. It's going into the community and engaging those who are directly impacted and giving them power, giving them the tools, giving them the power. I don't like the word empowerment because I feel like it sounds like you're giving somebody something that they don't have. They have the power. They need the tools with which to access and implement that power. In community organizing, you are identifying and training leaders. Now, who's a leader? Obviously, when we talk about leaders, well, who are those people? Well, it's not hard sometimes to get fooled on who are leaders. Leaders really, by definition, are someone with a following. Someone who has others that will follow their lead, that they can turn out others in support of actions or demonstration or any of the work that you're doing. And that's what community organizing is: identifying these leaders, is training them, giving them tools, and allowing them to impact and do the same thing with their following. We frequently use the example of the snowflake model. That's kind of a lot of how it works. Examples: Ohio Organizing Collaborative is an obvious example, but other organizations as well that are engaged in that throughout around the country. Obviously, you have those who are Faith in Action. And we can go on down the list of a number of community organizers who are out there doing that. They are not advocating, but they're out there and involved and connected with their constituency. And where is their power? Their power lies in the actual people. We think of a difference between, let's say, where we started, we were talking example of direct service. Where is their power? Their power lies, their social service, their power lies in their ability to hand out X amount of food or clothes or whatever it is that they're doing. And it doesn't grow. That's the extent of it. Self-help, it's all about self-actualization, self-change. Education, information, again, that's becoming experts, developing expertise on information, but there is no growth of power that goes beyond that it's limited to that organization. When you talk about advocacy, when you're speaking on behalf of someone else, a larger group, there's limitation in what you can do. There's limitation in how far you can go because you're not growing, you're not using the actual directly impacted people to grow your organization and to grow the impact that they can have because they themselves are stepping forward. They are at the center of the effort that goes with that. So that really is in a digest of what we talked about before, these different types of organizations. And I think something that, the question of why was I asked to share this is that that's a question that is on the floor. It's not something that can be quickly and easily answered. in a couple of minutes, but it's something that I think that we, UUJO as an organization, needs to ask itself and engage in intentional conversation about how can we best show up, especially in this time. Where do we fall on the spectrum of types of organizations? Looking at what they do, looking at where their power is vested, looking at the ability they have to grow and actually affect and change the systems that we're talking about. And where do we want to be with that? The community organizing, it kind of, to go, that's probably a little bit more of a further conversation, but those who are community organizing organizations, they have a makeup. I think we've seen this in our various work. They have obviously they have an organizer whose job is to go out there, they recruit leaders. That's how we grow and that's how we expand, empower. And leaders, we've said they have a following. Community organizing, you have activists. Activists don't have a large following. I think we've all seen this. We got people who are at the table, they don't have a large following, but they're great workers and they want to make the work happen. And they're powerful in that. But they're not necessarily a leader in having a following. And they're important to have. And that last one is free radicals. I love this. I just love sharing this term because I like it. Those are the people who come to your events and your meetings, the things that we're trying to do, but they really don't do much other than they have their own agenda. They're busy telling you all sorts of what you need to be doing and what we need to be doing. But you know what? They don't produce anything. But they're busy telling you what you need to be doing. These are things that make up a community that we find in community organizing. And that's because, that's really because it's different. It's different because, with an advocacy or these other ones, you have a very controlled group of who is actually doing the work and moving the organization. When you're getting the community organizing, it gets a little messier because you're actually having to go out there and deal with a lot of people who come from all different angles. And what we're trying to do is you're trying to identify leaders, you're trying to train them, raise them up, and get them out there doing the work themselves. It takes the center of the drive off of us as a community organizer entity and puts it in the power in the hands of the people. So wrapping that up, and I'm going to unshare my screen here in a second, so I don't know if I've missed any comments out there, and if I will, I'll take a look in the chat. But I love these two quotes here by Tarana Burke. This is so true, that we don't wait for people to come to us and say, help us organize. We have to go out into the community. And whatever our community is, whether it's our neighborhood community, whether it's congregations that we're working with, whether it's other organizations, we have to go out there and bring the skills to them that allow them to take the power themselves and to help us to grow an organization that can actually go out there and take on changing these structures that are in place. And the things that make they're putting those babies in the water and bringing them downstream. And finally, it's what makes it especially attractive is because it places faith in the ability of the poor to make decisions for themselves, not a think tank making it for them. So with that, I'm going to unshare my screen. There we go. And I'll take a peek in the chat and see if I have any questions.
Yeah, Edwin, I've been telling the friends about the questions in which you have posed out there, and there's a couple of examples there in which we do have. So again, I thank you. I thank you so much for leading that part there and giving us some ideas and some thoughts about what does organizing mean. And in some ways, I have seen that there are 10 rules of organizing. And I'm going to just run them through here very quickly. It says, rule number 1 is that no one would come to your meeting unless they've got a reason to come. Rule number 2, no one is going to come to a meeting unless they know about it. Rule number 3, if an organization doesn't grow, it will die. Rule number 4, anyone could be a leader. Number 5, the most important victory is the group itself. Rule number 6, sometimes winning is losing. Number 7, sometimes winning is winning. Rule number 8, if you're not fighting for what you want, you don't want it enough. Rule number 9, celebrate. And rule number 10, have fun. So those are the rules in which sometimes in which when I am doing my form of organizing, those are the things in which I subscribe to. So.
Were those supposed to be on the screen, Samuel?
Yes. Yes. So as we settle into this moment before we engage with our panelists, let us settle into this moment to sink into the wisdom that this work is sacred. The work of justice is sacred. The work of organizing and voting and protecting democracy is sacred. We know that our country is broken. We know that our system is not fair. We know that our democracy serves the powerful and the wealthy and not all of us. We know it is rigged, but it is not too late. We hold space in this room for those most impacted and harmed by this brokenness. We do not forget or ignore the human faces behind the oppression. The incarcerated who have lost their voice in an unjust system. The undocumented who are our neighbors and pay their fair share. The citizens whose voting stations have been closed, whose names have been taken from the registration list, who lacks an ID and is turned away from the poll. Let us bring into this space our ancestors, those who throughout history were deprived of their democratic rights because of their skin color, their ethnicity, their gender, their citizenship status, their poverty, their education. Bring into this space the radicals, the activists, the organizers, the reformers who fought for the vote. Bring into this space those who give their lives for this freedom, the right to hear our voice heard, the freedom that we defend today. May all of them be with us here. May they remind us may they remind us of mistakes. May they remind us of their courage. May they remind us that the path to justice is long and frustrating and full of setbacks, but that there is still hope, always hope. We have good and faithful company in this work. All those who come before, all those out there right now, all of us here, it is not yet too late. There is still hope. Let us work together. Yes, friends, as we're looking to organize, as we're looking to cast, our vote, individual votes, may we always have a place for democracy. May we always have a place for justice. Joan, I will have you take this away now. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Carol, for setting the stage for our presenters today. I'm Joan Van Biesler, and I am the director of Unitarian Universalist Justice, Ohio, for those of you who don't know me. And we're going to be hearing from a panel of absolutely wonderful folk who are incredibly involved in voter advocacy here in Ohio. First, we're going to hear from the Rev Dr Susan Smith, who's director of Crazy Faith Ministries and the communications director for the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. Then we'll hear from Susan Leslie, who is the Congregational Advocacy and Witness Director for the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. And then Maria Bruno, who's Director of Ohio Votes, Civic Engagement Coordinator for the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio, and the Steering Committee Chair of the Nonpartisan Ohio Voter Outreach Committee. No, we can't ever do any of our committees with short names, but that's in our tradition, I think. So we're going to get started now with Susan. And just a little reminder, are you registered for November? You'll see this flash occasionally during all of the presentations, because this is something that we do need to be looking at. You know, we have to know that we're registered well so we can help others to register. And Susan, I will let you start then. Tell us about what keeps us up at night and protecting our votes.
Buddy, am I off mute? Okay.
You are off mute.
Okay. I am just honored to be here and honored to have a couple of moments to speak with you guys. My little bit of this is to really talk about the need for voting and the plague called voter suppression, which is really it's a toxic, poisonous plague that we have to talk about and we have to recognize. I think that when we think about what's going on in our country, most of us have issues that will wake us up or at least bother us or make us angry or make us scared. And none of those, being angry or scared or bothered, none of those are reasons enough not to vote, because we have to understand, I stress this all of the time, that what we are fighting against is voter suppression. We are fighting against a movement that is seeking to transform the defining institutions of democracy. And it is a product of work that has been going on for a very long period of time. If I was speaking to, all of you guys are UUs, right? If I was speaking to the Baptists or something, I would say that we are fighting against powers and principalities. But in this group, I'm going to say that we are fighting against a movement, a political movement, which has been in operation for a very long time. They want to refound or reestablish this democracy or this country with what they call biblical law or biblical law. And that interpretation is very loose and very damaging really to the masses of people in this country. And so we have to understand that that's what we're fighting against. We have to loosen up our minds and think this is just about this presidential election, because it so much is not. It is so much more than that. We have to say things to ourselves like a mantra that all politics is local, and that if we don't vote and encourage the people with whom we interact, if we don't tell them and teach them to vote locally, vote for the judges and vote for the prosecutors and city attorneys and the council persons and the lawmakers and for levies, we're doomed. The Mitch McConnell has been on a rampage to appoint judges throughout the country. And so that means that even if we have some civil rights issues or human rights issues that would have come up before the courts, and we might have thought that we might get justice in the courts, that possibility is being more and more and more diluted. And so in order to protect ourselves and to protect the masses of the people who don't want to dismantle the democracy, we have to understand, we have to push and drive and tell people that their votes matter, number one, because a lot of people don't vote because they think their votes don't matter. And then we also have to emphasize that all politics is local. I tell the story all the time about this guy. We were on the streets for the midterm elections a couple of years ago, and there was this African-American guy and he was not going to vote, and he, you know, he was through with democracy, he was through with trying. And so I just wanted to have a conversation. That's part of what we're trying to do, is have conversations with people to get them to talk about what they're thinking and feeling and all of that. So we were talking, and I said, well, how come you don't want to vote? And he was giving me the reasons, like democracy sucks and it doesn't work and nobody cares about me and all of that. So then I just thought, I said, well, do you have anybody in your family that's gone to jail? He said, yeah. And he named off a couple of people. I said, well, do you know the name of the judge, or do you know the name of the prosecutor who is responsible for sending your relative or relatives to jail? He said, yeah. And then he went on this thing. I mean, he just talked and talked and talked about how the system had been so unfair to him and his family. And so I said to him, well, don't you know that you have the power? And that's what we're trying to do. We're teaching people that they have power. Don't you know that you have the power to change that stuff, but you have to vote? And then I talked to him about how the voters in Cleveland voted the McGinty out. I think it's McGinty who acquitted the police officers that killed that young 12-year-old boy, Tamir Rice. I said, you have the power. And when I said that to him, he was like flabbergasted. I said, you have the power. You got to claim it, and you got to tell your homeboys. You got to tell people that we have power. We are not powerless, and that's what people need to know. So that's why our work, your work, our work is so important right in through here. The other side knows how powerful we are. If they did not know how powerful we are, there would not be all of these efforts to suppress the vote. All of these things. We're going to show you a video about what happened in Wisconsin in a few minutes, but all of these efforts that they're doing, especially since 2008 when Barack Obama won the election, all of these things that they have put in place to make it more difficult for people to vote is part of voter suppression. Most of us don't know how widespread it is, how deep it is, and how damaging it is. It is our job to teach people about how bad it is, and to teach them, to teach all of us that, and the only way we don't have power is if we don't use it. That's the only way. We don't have power. We definitely can't. It's difficult. Yep. It's discouraging. Yep. When you see some of the things that the politicians are doing, when you think about gerrymandering, when you think about all of that. But guess what? Times have been hard in this country before, and people have banded together and used the power that they had, fought for the power that they wanted to have in order for people to get their right to vote. So all politics is local. And we have to tell people that it won't make any difference who's president if the state and local officials vote against your interests. It won't make any difference who's president if Donald Trump is not president, if our local people are not voting for our interests, and it won't make any difference if we don't flip the Senate. We have got to understand how broad our reach has to be. So and I'm telling everybody to get this book. It's called The Power Worshippers. If everybody could get this book, it's because it's so wonderful about talking about the movement that's going on. But some of the things that we are fighting to save, for instance, public education. This group does not like public education. Healthcare for all people. I mean, if you go through the list of all the things that people are wanting to dismantle, it's absolutely scary. And they're saying that these things that they're after and they're fighting for is biblical. It is not, but it's their biblical. It's their biblical. And so what we are trying to do is what we have to do in our education is to let people know what is going on. The name of that book again is The Power Worshippers. Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. I'll hold it up. The Power Worshippers. And then there's another book that is equally as informative, and it's called The Founding Myth. The Founding Myth. Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. I'm just giving these book things because it helps us to be educated so that we're not, flailing in the water. We have to have a directed path. So we have a video, Joan, we have a video of what happened in Wisconsin. We want to show you that. How many of you are troubled about what's going on? Just raise your hand or do something. Yeah, troubled about what's going on. We are allowed to be troubled, but we're not allowed to be paralyzed. So some of the things that keeping us out of the polls will affect is Medicaid, homelessness, people who are going hungry or food challenged, of course, healthcare, loss of hospitals in rural areas, people being unemployed or underemployed, COVID-19, all of this. I am afraid of how the healthcare system is going to be overloaded. I am concerned about all of the people who will need care and who do not have health care. But all of those issues, I am afraid that it's going to affect all of us. I am afraid. I'm reading about the flu pandemic of 1918, and I'm just floored about the width and the breadth of how bad these things can be. So we're going to come back to these Ohio facts in a second, but we want to show you a video now of what happened in Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago.
We expect more cases, we expect more deaths, we expect more tragedies. I cannot in good conscience allow any types of gathering that would further the spread of this disease and to put more lives at risk. There's not a sufficiently safe way to administer in-person voting tomorrow.
I am 65. I'm a type 2 diabetic. I've had heart issues. I mean, those are the risk factors they say can make it more serious.
I actually think that it's suppressive and dangerously irresponsible that the legislature hasn't either delayed the election or made it all mail-in ballot. I had a moment where I just really was not sure that I could do this. I woke up crying.
We have some best practices thing set up in there with a plexiglass shield between the voter and the poll workers. We're going to have masks available, gloves available, hand sanitizer, but it's still going to be something that is a risk. We normally use 13 different polling locations. We normally have 300 poll workers to staff those locations. As of 10 days ago, we were down to 40.
So, boy, that ended quicker than I thought it was. So the problems that we have are, as we said, it's this voter suppression. And I'm going to ask you a question. You can put it in the chat box. Who do you think will be affected? Because this has to be part of our messaging as we're doing our teaching and our training and our advocacy and our organizing. Who will be affected if American institutions as we know them are dismantled? You can put it in the chat box. You can say it out loud. Who do you think will be affected? Anybody? I think, thank you, John, because it is all of us. One of the problems that we have to fight against is that when people have not had difficult lives, if they haven't faced oppression themselves, if they haven't been on the brunt end of the short stick of democracy, they think it won't affect them. One of the reasons why the coronavirus is so devastating right now is that people who have never had to suffer in ways that they're suffering now are suffering, and they don't know how to do it. And they don't know, people don't realize that if they don't care about the people in the prisons and the people who take care of the people who are in the prisons and the people in the senior citizens homes, if they don't care about those people, whoever is sick in the prison or in the senior citizen home will end up, that will have a path or a journey to people who are not in those homes. So the very wealthy are just as vulnerable as the very poor. And people don't realize that. That's what we're up against. So we are fighting for this thing that is the seedbed or the bedrock of democracy, one person, one vote. It has never really been that here. Never, ever in this country. It has always been, and everybody knows this, that the vote was always meant for a certain group of people, mainly wealthy, white, Protestant men. And then after the Civil War, you know, because there's always all this stuff, everything seems to be undergirded by racism. And you may not want to hear that, but that is the absolute truth. But after the Civil War, then they had Reconstruction, and they had the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which some people say really made the Constitution be what it was supposed to be, but in actuality, it never was. So we are still fighting for one person, one vote. And the fight is still against one person, one vote. So in 2000, and it's across the country, and it's here in Ohio. In 2018, the Supreme Court upheld the Ohio 1995 law that chomps registrations of inactive voters who haven't cast a ballot for 6 years and who have not responded to a postcard. Many people don't respond to postcards. I don't respond to postcards, but they know that that's a tactic. There are so many tactics that are used to say that people are not eligible. When we were out registering people, again, for the midterms, we had our iPads with us, because people will say, it's not that big a deal, and I'm already registered. And I said, okay, I understand, but let's just check since we're here. And we would have the iPad would give me your name and all that information, and they would find out that they had been purged. And that ticked them off. They didn't realize it. They don't check. You know, we are advised to check our registrations all of the time. Carol Anderson, an author of a couple of books, said she checks hers once a week. But people who have been voting for years, who have never moved from their homes, are finding out that they're being purged. This casting or sending a postcard is a tactic, and many people get thrown off of the rolls because they haven't returned a postcard that they never even looked at. In Ohio, on January 11th, 2019, 267,000 registrations were taken off the rolls. That is unconscionable. That's just unconscionable. A second purge was planned for September, but then the dispatch identified more than 1,600 active voters who were incorrectly notified that their registrations were about to be purged for inactivity, and some had cast ballots as recently as 2018. I have a personal friend who has lived in his house for 30 years, never moved, and went to vote in the midterms and was told that he could not vote. And he said, why? And they looked and they had the wrong address for him. I don't know how that happened. I'm growing so cynical. I don't know how much of this stuff is done on purpose, but he was told when he went to the polls that he could not vote. And it was the first time in over 20 years that he had not voted. I mean, there's stuff like that happening all the time. In Columbus, Franklin County elections officials identified about 1,100 other people who were flagged for removal for inactivity, even though they had signed petitions. So with these discoveries, there's not a great move on by the city government or by the state government to correct the situations. The move is to continue to increase the numbers of people who cannot vote. And that is what we're fighting against. That's why we have to teach so much about voter suppression. There's inconsistent record keeping and inaccurate voter registration software, and it makes it difficult to check whether purges were conducted correctly. But even when they have not been conducted correctly, we're fighting against the system. We're fighting against institutions, and it makes it very, very, very difficult to change things that have been embedded in the system. In Shelby County in Western Ohio, the elections board told state officials that they had removed 845 voters in January, but the list provided to reporters had just 210 voters on it. Secretary of State LaRose said that Ohio's county by county voter registration in Ohio leads to a mess of inconsistent data. And the battle cry that you will hear, we've all heard, is that there's a lot of voter fraud going on. Most of the voter fraud that's going on is on the other side. It is not with the masses of people. It's with the people who are higher up, actually, on the other side, people who are seeking to keep their power. That's where the fraud is going on. And so the struggle is to get people to understand that as we have an understanding of what's going on, then we have the tools with which to fight. We can't fight if we don't know what's going on. We have to go into this with our eyes wide open so that when we're fed a bowl of oatmeal with no sugar, We can say, no, this is not right. We can challenge them. What they count on is us not challenging them. So we need to be able to say, whenever they say things to us like that, we need to be so knowledgeable. William Barber says we have to know the Constitution. We have to know the state constitution. We have to know the federal constitution. We have to know the law, because they will throw things at us. And if we're silent, just because we don't know, we give them the power. In Ohio was 29th in U.S. in the overall voter turnout in 2018. That is not acceptable. Only 50.4% of registered Ohio voters turned out in 2018. That's not good, and it's certainly not good enough for such a time as this. Our turnout of young people is awful. It is awful. 22% of voters ages 18 to 24 turned out. They're very, very, very disenchanted, many of them. It's our job to change that some kind of way. Minnesota had a turnout of 64%. That's compared to ours, 50%. Minnesota, Colorado, Montana, Wisconsin, and Oregon all had 61.5%. But Ohio, which is the state which determines, that we always say, so goes Ohio, so goes the nation. We have a 50.4% turnout. That's not good. Many of our Ohioans right now today are still unregistered to vote. And it's not enough to register to vote, but we need to support everybody in voting and having their vote count. And we need to train people to register people correctly so that when those forms are filled out, they are accepted. I can think of a few other things that will discourage people more than to have gone through the process and filled out the form and then learned that something was wrong on their application, therefore they can't vote. That is a surefire way to discourage people forever. So now the training of poll workers and the training of people who do voter education has to be deeper and more detailed than it has ever been. They will not let you vote for the tiniest of things. You know, if in a video that we're not going to show you today, there's a guy who's been voting for a number of years, and let's say his name was Del Rosa, and there was a Del, D-E-L, capital D-E-L, and then capital R-O-S-A. That's on his driver's license. But on the voter rolls, it has it all one word. So we have to be able to help people check how their signatures appear. So I'm saying it's just a lot of work. It's not just a go knock on the door, fill out this paper, bye, I'll see you later. It is a really, really intricate process that we have to go through in training people and getting people registered so that we can really make our voices be heard. So I think I beat the bull enough. The video that we're not gonna see today, but the fight to vote, we want everybody to see that. Rigged, the voter suppression playbook, we want you to look at that, but not just watch these, but get a group of people to watch with you. It would be great if you could have, like, you know, do y'all do like Saturday night dinners or something? Do you guys do that kind of stuff?
Sometimes.
But get a fellowship, you know, and watch those and watch the faces of the people and get their reactions. And when they watch it, because the education, the opening up of their eyes about what's going on is what's going to help us make a difference in this election in Ohio this fall. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And I do have the material up on the slide right now. This is being recorded. And if you email me, I can also send this to you as well. And I see that Carol has put the link for the full movie, a short link for the full movie in the chat box too. Now, we're not going to take any formal breaks, but if you have self-care, you can do self-care if you need to get a cup of coffee or some water at any point. Just want to let you know that. Our next presenter is Susan Leslie, who is the Congregational Advocacy and Witness Director for the UUA. And also her office has just given UU Justice Ohio a $12,500 grant for voter advocacy work coming up later this year. So we really are appreciative of what Susan has given us so that we can hire an organizer on honoraria and do the kinds of things that we need to do to, as Susan said, to help people get enthusiastic and inspired to vote as well as registered right. So I'm going to show you another little slide here about how you can get involved, and we'll also play this again at the end. But you can email me, or you can sign up for the Nonpartisan Ohio Voter Outreach Committee. This is the committee that UUJO and UU the Vote and many others are working through, and Maria will tell you more about that. But working together so that we can bring together all of our different agencies and resources for synergy. So you can be part of this movement. Susan asked me to play a video to start, and then she will talk to us about UU the Vote. Susan.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be with you here today. I bring you greetings from everyone at the UU the Vote national team, and Susan Frederick Gray asked me to convey her thanks to all of you. In 2020, we must carry on that legacy we just saw. That is our faith. That is who we are as a people, and we will. I'm sharing a presentation with you that our UU the Vote team developed earlier this year, and I've tried to update it for organizing during a pandemic. Like many of you, everything that we had been doing for the last few months that we were ready to roll out has had to be completely recalibrated in a lot of ways. However, I believe the reasons for developing this campaign are even more relevant, urgent, and mandated by our faith now. So I've got some slides for you, as you see. UU the Vote is a national campaign being coordinated by the UUA organizing strategy team. And it was great to hear all the talk about organizing today. This is something new at the UUA, that we have an organizing strategy team. My title, Advocacy and Wetness, comes from earlier days. I kept it because people know me that way. But I will agree with what Edwin was saying, that, you know, we do direct service and we need mutual aid right now. And we do research and we do education and we do witness, but it's all from the perspective of organizing. We need all these things to build power, and it's through that organizing frame that we figure out what we're going to work on and how we prioritize. Key UU partner organizations in this campaign are the UU state action networks, such as UUJO. We are also working in partnership with some national organizations, including the Sunrise Movement, the Poor People's Campaign, and others. But as Reverend Susan said, all good work is local, and on-the-ground partnerships are what will really inspire people to vote, love, and defeat hate. So we all know that the stakes couldn't be higher in the 2020 elections. All our values, our work for justice, the communities we love, and the beloved community that we seek to create are under attack. Our religious community must speak with moral courage and with prophetic clarity, and also just roll up our sleeves determination in this 2020 electoral cycle. as we see, we have a legacy of working to expand democracy and to shape a world in which all people are free and flourishing. I really believe our UU values of interdependence, democracy, and the inherent worth and dignity of all people we respect are direct antidotes to the fear, bigotry, and inequity that define our world right now. And in this political moment, UUs are called to join forces with all people who want to organize our communities and our nation to indeed vote love and defeat hate. So that's what UU the Vote is about. And that's what we were saying pre-pandemic. And I think the structural inequities in our society that have been revealed even more sharply by the pandemic make this all the more true. So what is UU the Vote campaign? Well, broadly, it's an integrated, multi-level, multi-strategy campaign to engage UUs across the US in the 2020 electoral cycle. We're looking at unprecedented broad collaboration between our congregations, our state networks, our regions, our national UU organizations, the UUA, and really importantly, multi-faith and justice organizing partners at all levels. We cannot do this alone, we know this. UU the Vote is providing on-ramps for all UUs to collaborate for concrete impacts in 2020. We're also investing in long-term leadership development, spiritual grounding, and organizing capacity for our faith. So the campaign supports UU participation in movement building for policy wins and justice organizing in 2020 and beyond, at the local, state, and national level. And this now includes getting justice during this pandemic. So the main areas of work are, mobilizing voters, combating voter suppression, leveraging our own infrastructure and assets, our people, our resources, our buildings when we can open them up again. Canvassing and values-based issue conversations, as Rev Susan says, community conversations, and providing spiritual grounding, sustenance, and support and relief for our communities. So the organizing plan consists of 3 tiers. Tier 1 is about deep strategic work in critical areas with on-the-ground investment of organizers and money between now and November 2020. So this looks like mobilization of UUs from one state to another. Now, at this point, we're doing phone banking and texting. We've done that already with UUs in Ohio and in Wisconsin and in Georgia. It's an all hands on deck approach, a plan to increase or build capacity and infrastructure within state action networks, justice clusters, and create or strengthen organizing partnerships. So Ohio is definitely a tier 1 state in this organizing plan. And as Joan mentioned, UU the Vote is making an investment in Ohio. Tier 2 is work with key partners in strategic areas at strategic moments. For example, we could mobilize UUs in other states to help Ohio, as we recently did with your Ohio Voter Rights Coalition campaign to text Ohio voters. Additionally, we'll support UUs and partners working on strategic ballot initiatives. We know you're working on an automatic voter registration initiative here in Ohio. We're doing this in other states too that aren't necessarily tier 1 states, but where a win on a ballot measure could help move the whole field of organizing forward. For example, where there's measures to stop criminalization and end mass incarceration in California and other places. And as we tried to do with UUJO and Ohio Organizing Collaborative and others on issue 1 in 2018, which I feel we lost forward. We didn't win, but Edwin said sometimes it's not always a loss if you're building power as you move forward. Tier 2 is short-term strategic mobilizations and investments of staff time, people power, and money that will have a high impact for UUs and our partners and communities. So then tier 3 is for everyone. It consists of the national program and resources for all UUs. We have toolkits for congregational organizing, how to form a team, recruit volunteers, work with partners, and support engagement activities. We're providing trainings in an ongoing way, support for online gatherings now. We were doing some on the ground, organizing calls, webinars, and spiritual resources. We have a ton of info on all the 501c3 rules for electoral engagement that apply to religious organizations and nonprofits. And we're creating a hub for models and stories from the real work and the lived experience. In fact, we already have a story up about UUs who have worked to establish food banks to serve undocumented communities, as was discussed earlier. And we sent out a story on our UU the Vote email about UUs in Ohio getting stacks of absentee ballot requests to grocery stores, pharmacies, apartment complex offices, and other public places. Through all this, we're going to be tracking our collective progress. So all the issues we care most deeply about, climate, migrant, LGBTQ, racial, economic justice, and more, we all know are at stake in the 2020 elections, locally and nationally. And now we're dealing with a pandemic that has brought on an even deeper health, economic, and really potential democracy crisis. This campaign is not about adding another thing to work on or abandoning work that's already in progress. It's about incorporating an electoral lens into our strategies and doing that at this crucial time. So that means using relational apps to do voter registration, as we just did yesterday as part of the virtual climate strikes. It means advocating with election officials to collect online signatures for ballot initiatives. It means joining Justice Partner phone banks for online voter registration drives, canvassing conversations, and making our resources available to local organizations who share our values and are leading work around all these issues and people that matter to us. We're setting up some key times for all-out collective participation in voter engagement activities. And we're saying, bring your passion to the polls. Whatever work you're doing, there's an electoral piece to it, you can be sure. So together as congregations, committees, individuals, state action networks, and national teams, along with all our partner organizations on the various levels, we really can have a broad and strategic impact. We really can do our part and make a difference. An important principle of UU the Vote is that there is a role for everyone. We have volunteers already doing this, and a small national staff is not going to be able to bring this up to the scale that we're talking about. Our organizing depends on deepening and resourcing leadership that's already out there. As Becky Bond says in Big Organizing, immediately we began putting volunteers into positions of power. We did this by asking not who wanted to lead, but who was ready to get to work. Every group that stands for something important, no matter how small, has a list of supporters, and those supporters want to help your effort to succeed. Put them to work. There are a ton of people out there with incredible life and work experience who are just waiting to shine. They get often denied access to movement leadership when organizations insist on only giving responsibility to full-time paid and nonprofit employees. And I would just add to her thought that, lots of people just want to be invited to do something. Not everybody wants to come to a meeting, but they definitely want to pitch in. Everyone feels better when they get an opportunity to do that. So the role of the UU the Vote national team is to equip UUs with skills, tools, analysis, and resources, amplify the stories and activities of participating groups, connect UUs with each other across states and with partners, coordinate activities and plans to be greater than the sum of our parts, and to provide spiritual sustenance, grounding, and orientation at this time. So 2020 is a benchmark and an inflection point, not an end. We are working for concrete wins in 2020, as I said, but we really want to build structures and capacity for the long-term work of bending the arc toward justice. So our timeline, we started with a design and discovery phase in the fall that included an energy scan We did a soft launch before the holidays on December 3rd, Giving Tuesday. We got a great response. People started pouring in money, signing up to volunteer. We had over 125 watch parties and over 1,500 UUs online when we rolled out the campaign on January 12th. And that is the largest online gathering that we ever had in our history. I imagine General Assembly this year will probably surpass that. We rolled out a toolkit, peer support groups, coaching teams. We've got a UU the Vote Facebook group, Tuesday night office hours. They're just Zoom calls where people can come and jump on with questions, feedback, stories to share, and Slack channels. And you can find all these at uuthevote.org. There's a green box that shows you how to join all of them, easy instructions. So our timeline now is to bring UUs together. And you know, I don't know if you can refresh the slides because I made a few changes since I sent my link to you, Joan, where I added one, but it may just not have worked. Okay, so our timeline now is to bring UUs together at online statewide gatherings this spring, like this one, to develop statewide plans, recruit volunteers, and provide funding. So the UU funding program has $500 Get Out the Vote microgrants for congregations, and the campaign has established a state action fund. And as Joan said, I'm really happy to say that UUJO is a recipient of a grant from that fund, and you've earned it. On May 12th, we're hosting another large event. We're going to reset UU the Vote because, you know, the world has changed significantly since that launch, and to really look at how we can keep organizing for justice during a pandemic. We're calling it How We Thrive, and we hope you can attend and invite others. And if you go to uuthevote.org, you'll see in the left-hand menu, How We Thrive. And I'm sure, you know, I'll be working with Joan to get invitations out. From there, we're going to continue to roll out voter outreach opportunities and activities being provided by partners, from texting, phone banking, sending postcards to voters, to advocating for vote by mail, expansion of early voting, online ballot signature collection, and safe and secure drop-off points for ballots and polling places. And we're doing this with national and state coalitions. We had UUs calling into Ohio. Another form of voter suppression was people didn't know that they didn't just have to get their ballot into the mail. There were drop-off points. They didn't have to go to the polls. There were drop-off points. There were libraries open in each neighborhood, and people didn't know. So as we were calling people to let them know this, we also were finding out that many had requested absentee ballots and had not received them. So the campaign we were working with had us track all of that as well. And, you know, there's court suits going on leading into the general. Of course, General Assembly will be a nodal point. We'll have training for folks. Like everyone, you know, people are getting zoomed out. So we were going to do a 3-workshop track. We're doing 1 workshop. We're looking at what is really essential and figuring out what we're going to be offering there. I'm also excited to tell you Naomi Klein is the WARE lecturer this year, and she has just been talking about there really is an opportunity in this moment, even though obviously fascism could get consolidated, it's also the case that real transformation could come out of this moment. And we're seeing that. We're seeing the mutual aid networks. We're seeing what's happening with the climate. We're seeing ways that we could also fight for the society we dream of. So in August, we will be shifting all out to actual get out the vote efforts to make sure that everyone who can vote knows how they can vote and to help them do that. As our UUA president, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray says, let's UU the vote in 2020. We're asking you to contribute if you can or to take up a collection. We'd like you to sign up to stay in the loop. We do a weekly email now from our brand new national coordinator, Nicole Presley. That gives you updates about the trainings that we're doing, as well as the hands-on activities you can participate in. You can also text Vote Love to 51555 to get right on that. We're also sharing stories from the field and more. So let's vote love, defeat hate, organize for justice, and demand it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Susan. We will be taking questions at the end after we hear Maria Bruno. So write your questions down in the chat or keep a track of them by your desk there, because we'll have conversation with all three panel members at the end. And so now I want to introduce Maria Bruno. And Maria Bruno, as I said, is Director of Ohio Votes, the Civic Engagement Coordinator with the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio, and the Steering Committee Chair of that Nonpartisan Ohio Voter Outreach Committee that is part of the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition, of which we are a part. Maria.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so you guys will notice there's an alphabet soup next to my name, and that's intentional because we're gonna go through what each of these things are and how the pieces work together. So as Joan said, my name's Maria Bruno. I run the Ohio Votes initiative, which is an initiative of the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio, also known as COHHIO. You probably have heard one or the other. The Ohio Voter Rights Coalition then runs the NOVOC, which is the Nonpartisan Ohio Voter Outreach Committee. So I'm gonna go through what both of those things are and how they work together and how you can plug yourself in. Next slide. Okay, so the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition is a group of organizations that basically all come around the theme that we believe in democracy, and we prioritize Ohio voters' rights. So it includes organizations like COHHIO, like All Voting is Local, like Joan's organizations, UUJO, Ohio Student Association, Ohio Voice, Common Cause, League of Women Voters, and a lot of other organizations. So basically, it is a table of organizations that are all working together to fight against attacks on voting rights and to make sure that you know, our elected officials pay attention to voters' needs, but also our voters have an advocate at the table when there is a need to. Next slide. Okay, so within Ohio Voter Rights Coalition is our Nonpartisan Ohio Voter Outreach Committee, also unofficially known as the Herd the Cats organization. So basically, this is an organizing circle for voter advocates and 501c3 organizations that engage in nonpartisan voter activities. The goal of this is to centralize communication among these organizations and also minimize duplicative work. We want to be able for folks working in different parts of the states, but on similar issues, to connect with each other so that they can share ideas, learn from each other, and make sure that, you know, everyone has the maximum impact that they can have. And we want to also connect local nonprofits with folks doing voter engagement. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. That's where Ohio Votes comes in. And then we provide engagement opportunities for volunteers looking to get involved. We have different subcommittees that I will go over here in a second, and thank you, perfectly timed. And so we have the basic structure of the Voter Outreach Committee is that we have a steering committee, but we have a bunch of subcommittees, and the subcommittees are major themes that come up in voting rights. You know, if there becomes a theme that really isn't covered with one of these subcommittees, then we can talk about adding one, but this really should be pretty inclusive. Our subcommittees include election protection, which focuses on voting rights and making sure that on election day we've got poll monitors, we've got our hotline for voter rights staffed, we have all the pieces to protecting voters and voter rights put together. Faith and that is led by Camille Wimbish of Ohio Voice, who actually leads and I believe founded the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition. The Faith and Advocacy Subcommittee focuses on how religious communities and voting rights work together. We have a lot of faith communities like your own that, you know, are interested in community engagement, but also our 501c3s also have, you know, their own missions. And there is a particular need and also desire, I think, to have the discussion around how faith and advocacy work together. Voter education, and that is led by Nick Bates of the Hunger Network of Ohio. Voter education, I actually am for now also leading this, but that is only because the person who was supposed to had other obligations and could no longer do that. So I probably will be hopefully recruiting another voter education chair who can take on some of this work, because as you can see, I've got a big plate here. Voter registration, this is led by our lovely Joan. This will be the group of people who are specifically organizing voter registration opportunities. And so we will have folks from all across the state working together, talking about what they're doing with voter reg. I think this is all the more important in the COVID time, just because I think there's a lot more need for creative solutions to a lot of new problems. So hopefully we can all, you know, brainstorm and really come up with our best possible plan. National Voter Registration Week is an initiative of Nonprofit Vote that fits in with Ohio Votes I'll discuss in a second, but that is a week that is in September, late September, and it basically is just a special week that we hope everyone will focus a little bit more on voter registration. By consolidating it to that week, we can have action items, we can have events happening all across the state, we can get a little press from organizations and from outlets that are interested in this. And it allows people to just, you know, focus for a little bit on specifically getting folks registered about 2 weeks before the voter registration deadline. Minority vote is led by our lovely Susan Smith and Tom Roberts of the NAACP. This, as you might suspect, is where we make sure that religious, ethnic minorities, racial minorities are included in the conversation. Now, obviously, that's a large group of people, and I'll, in a second, talk about how we want to put an extra effort to make sure these diverse communities are represented at the table. But I am very confident that Susan and Tom are the right folks to make sure that that subcommittee stays inclusive and allows us to specialize on focusing on reaching out to these communities that are often left out of the conversation. If you could go back to the previous slide. There we go. Okay, thank you. Disability vote is our, as you might expect, is focusing on disability voting rights. A lot of specific, very particular issues come up when you're dealing with disability voting rights issues. That is actually being led by Lisa Worm from the Disability Rights Ohio. And so that will be focused on those kinds of needs that pop up. Transportation to the polls. This is, well, basically, we do rides to the polls, which I hesitate to even say out loud because I'm not sure how that works in COVID. We had to cancel our rides this time around, obviously, due to safety concerns, and who knows where we'll be in November, but that might also be the scenario. But generally, transportation to the polls is going to focus on the resources that are needed to get folks to the polls. So that might be working with, public transportation networks and asking them to provide free rides to election day. It might be working with nonprofits who have vans. It might be working with individual volunteers and everything in between. And then voting in the census that's being led by a new organizer. His name is Jared Kopeny. And I am very excited for him to get oriented with all of us. And he rather recently returned from being in the armed forces. So he's really excited to jump back into this work. And then voting in the census is being led by Katie Shanahan, who runs, what is the name of the organization? It's a redistricting organization.
All on the line.
Thank you, all on the line. Brain fart. And so that focuses on redistricting, which is of course very related to the census. We are also working with the Ohio Organization of Nonprofits, OCAC, to get a representative to actually co-chair that subcommittee with Katie to make sure that we are all on the same page. And then the steering committee is going to include all the chairs of each of these committees. myself, and then anyone who doesn't yet have a seat from that. So I think I saw Carol just mentioned youth voting. So we might, want a youth voting advocate specifically on our steering committee to make sure that's a piece of our conversation. Maybe we don't have any from the Latinx community, making sure that we have someone who's a community leader in that community represented at the table. So this is meant to, any gaps that are left from the actual subcommittees, hopefully we will make up for by at least having that group represented at the decision-making table. So each of these subcommittees will have their own projects, they will have their own objectives, and they will have a network of people all across the state working together. Next slide. So each subcommittee has a chair. I just mentioned who those are. The obligations are monthly check-in calls, and then ongoing correspondence on Slack, which is a medium that we will have a training session for. You might already use it. You might have no idea what it is. That's okay. Either of those is fine. And then also ongoing projects. So the chair is going to work with the subcommittees to develop their objectives, develop their first projects, their short-term projects, their long-term projects. This is all going to be at the discretion of those subcommittees because those are the folks who have signed up to specifically focus on this issue. The steering committee is led by myself, I just mentioned. It will include the subcommittee chairs, leader from underrepresented communities, and then also our OHHIO Votes regional liaisons, which I'll discuss in a second. But these are folks who basically organize the local operations on the ground in different parts of the state. Same thing, monthly check-in calls in addition to the subcommittee calls, ongoing correspondence on Slack, keeping up with ongoing projects. So that's the additional piece of work is hopefully everyone at that table will have their own update of what they're working on and also be ready to listen to everyone else's update. And then also provide, create a unified calendar of all activities. So we can make sure that, all of our pieces are fitting together. Efforts aren't being duplicative. We're not scheduling over each other. And so we're going to work together to basically have a unified schedule so that all of us can stay on the same page. Next slide. So OHHIO Votes is the initiative of COHHIO, as I mentioned earlier. We specifically target low-income and disenfranchised communities. And we are completely 501c3 nonpartisan compliant. Our role is to be a statewide organizational recruitment organization. We recruit volunteers. We focus on, we began to, obviously we've expanded our role, but we focus on National Voter Registration Week of Action. We provide voter education programming and we provide resources to our partners. So that might be in the form of providing posters, it might be paying for pizza, it might be making sure that we have some one-pagers on different races that are happening in the election this year. It really depends on the needs. Again, a lot of this is based around the concept of in-person events. And so a lot of it will be rehashed and put online, and we'll figure out where to put stuff as we go. But that is our traditional role. Next slide. So we also are the hinge between the national organization that works with 501c3 organizations and the direct service and the voting advocates on the ground. We have, advocates all around the state who are interested in volunteering, interested in helping, and sometimes they don't even know, where to go. We also have a bunch of nonprofits around the state that we work with on our housing and homelessness issues who are curious or interested in voter outreach, but not sure how to do it, maybe don't have staff capacity, maybe don't have resources, don't have all the pieces to make that happen. And so we put those folks together. And then we have, next slide, please. And then we have regional liaisons all around the state to do that. So we have folks who specifically will focus on a metro area. And then we have one person who is a statewide minus the metro area. So if you're not in one of these metro areas and you're interested in working on this work, we certainly want you to have an avenue to do that and a resource to be able to utilize. So we do have someone who's sort of a catch-all who will make sure that everyone, no matter where you are in the state, has the opportunity to participate. Next slide. So now that I have sort of explained the organizational model, and we're doing a lot of organizational modeling, so this is like a masterclass in organizing. But so there's different levels of involvement. So we've got our steering committee, as I mentioned. We have our coordinator level, and those are folks who are subcommittee chairs and Ohio Votes regional liaisons. We mostly are staffed up for both of these roles. That being said, I'm sure there are plenty of subcommittee chairs who wouldn't mind splitting the work, and Ohio and regional liaisons who would love to have an extra pair of hands. So if you're like, I really want to be, you know, on the coordinator level, making sure that I'm making a lot, you know, putting a lot of time into this, then shoot me an email and we can figure out where we can put you. The organizer level is sort of a half step down from the coordinator level as far as time commitment. That's going to be your subcommittee members, folks who are committed to working on a specialized subject matter. Project leaders, people who might actually take on, you know, putting on events specifically in the Latinx community. You know, that might be an example of a voter registration project that we've got going on. So someone has to lead that. So each of those projects will need someone who, you know, takes the lead, and you can be one of those people. Or of course we have the captains, which is Joan's area of expertise, but are folks who are leading their local congregations. And then we have individual participants. Maybe you don't have the time or energy to do a leadership role, but you certainly want to participate in some of the activities. Maybe you're a nonprofit who doesn't have much to offer in the way of voter outreach, but is happy to unlock the doors and get a volunteer in there who can put on some programming. So each of these levels is a possibility. If you're looking on where you fit, you know, think about how much time you want to be putting into this. If you want to be responsible for a project or other people's, you know, information loop or whatever it might be. So next slide, please. And we specifically need folks in these second two tiers. So, you know, I just mentioned these: joining, actively participating in a subcommittee, in a UU group, putting on your own activities, or again, individual participants who just, you know, want to be trained as a voter registration outreach person. You can be called upon when there's an event that needs a staff member, someone who knows how to register voters. You can, you know, go to that nonprofit back to school backpack drive that they're having and help them register voters there. And so there are a lot of different opportunities for those one-off or lower level individual volunteer events. Next slide, please. So probably you have a few questions. One, does this work even make a difference? Two, do we really all have to be getting around these same tables? And three, am I really ready to participate in this activity? So I'm going to answer each of those, but I'm going to start with why shouldn't we just be doing our own thing? I cannot tell you how hard voter advocates have been working to break down silos that have grown over time between different organizations and different types of poverty outreach folks or faith communities. And so we really are doing our best to knock down all of those walls of those silos. And so this is our way to do that. And again, herd the cats. We don't want to change anyone's goals or mission. We just want to be able to fit those into a larger puzzle so that we can all make sure that we're maximizing our impact. And then I want to focus on, are you really ready for these activities? Yes. These things, you know, Joan and I have been doing this and Susan have been doing this for a little while. We are more than happy to help guide you. If you're like, I want to help, but I don't even know where to begin. What should I be doing? You know, we're there to help you do that. So you have a team behind you, and it's a great opportunity to learn a bunch and, you know, work within a larger network so that you don't have to, you know, reinvent the wheel, but you can still grow as an organizer and really make sure that you have an impact. Sorry, I'm going to read through some of these comments to see if there's any questions. Okay. Someone asked why vote by mail wasn't a specific category, and I believe they probably mean a specific subcommittee. So that will actually fall in the election protection category. We have a group of folks who work on basically eliminating as many barriers to voting as possible. That might be in the form of making sure that the voter ID requirements are reasonable. It might come in the form of making sure that postage is paid for on mail-in ballots. It might be extending early in-person voting hours. It comes up in a lot of ways, but it is included under election protection. So if that's your area of passion, that would be the subcommittee to go to, and maybe you can even lead the vote by mail initiative. Yeah, so someone asked, how will all of this, be revamped for our new reality, which is COVID-19, which is folks needing to stay home? And the answer is we're working on it. One thing that has been sort of really neat is this has forced a lot of people to learn technology they might otherwise be too intimidated to learn. And so now that we know how Skype works, or we know how Zoom works, or we know how GoToMeeting works, we can have events and activities on those platforms. So I'm hoping that the increased need for remote strategies also coincides with an increased desire to participate in those remote strategies. So we are working on developing events, whether that's a voter education forum. We have an activity on Tuesday night for healthcare on the ballot. So we're going to explain how healthcare and this election are connected. And that will be something that will be screened online. You don't have to leave your couch. You can ask questions in the box, and hopefully you can, keep participating in all the work we're doing.
Maria, at the end, I also have just a quick list of all the ways folk can be involved while still maintaining the social distance.
Perfect. Okay, great. And the last question was, does this really matter? And so I'm going to discuss data in a second, but the short answer is it absolutely matters. Nonprofit Vote, which is the national organization that I mentioned, they do research, and I'm going to talk about data, which is how they get the information for that research. So when you're looking at these, remember that the more that data we have, the more information we have, the more of these kind of voting patterns we can figure out. So basically what they did is they compared voters with similarly situated demographic voters. So it would be, people that we interacted with. So folks who were at a nonprofit or otherwise engaged with us, and let's say Black women in their 20s. Well, they compare them to the voting rates of other Black women in their 20s. Were they more with similar incomes? Were those groups more likely to show up after interacting with us? And so that is the question that we were asking, and here are the answers that we got. So for younger voters, specifically for people 18 to 24, they were 20 points more likely to show up to the polls. So 20% more likely to show up. 25 to 34-year-olds, they were 15% more likely to show up. And it goes up for each demographic, but especially for young voters, just interacting with them increased the likelihood that they would participate in the election. We really are doing effective targeting as of right now and plan to continue it. 50% of all the voters that were engaged by nonprofits through Ohio Votes program were earning less than $30,000 a year. So those are folks who really are the low income category, people who, again, are often ignored in this political system. Black voters who were engaged by nonprofits were 12% more likely to vote. And the lowest propensity voters that were engaged were 17% more likely to vote. So these are, 10 to 20 point jumps in participation rates. So this is completely meaningful and effective work. And so we're really excited to keep building on this success year to year. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just mentioned, how do we get that information? Well, we use that through data. So we have our web portal, we have our, copy and registration forms, absentee ballot forms. And so often people are kind of like, well, why do we do that? That feels kind of icky. And we do it for the research. Unfortunately, a lot of this work we can't really effectively measure our impact without research about the voters that we interact with. So for organizations, it's nice because we can, provide resources to nonprofits, but also get information from nonprofits. We can do quality control, so we can make sure that these people that we're interacting with, voter registrations are actually going through. We can keep track of how effective different kinds of engagement are. Are the events getting all the folks? Is it the passive, petitions? What is getting people to engage the most? Network building, of course, obviously, the more you do this work, the larger your footprint becomes in the community, in the groups that you're working with. And you can help us, improve our impact on the ground. So again, back to not reinventing the wheel, not duplicating effort. We really make sure that we're all, getting the largest impact that we can. And then the benefits to voters, basically we provide as a trusted member of their community, engaging with them on voter registration. We can give them extra confidence that their registration will be properly processed, that their vote will count. Some of the reasons that people don't engage, which is skepticism, hopefully we can start to chip away at that a little bit. And then also they can sign up for nonpartisan voting reminders, which is basically a text a week out from the election saying, hey, friendly reminder, here's the election, here are the hours, here's your polling location, follow up if you have any questions with us. So it provides voters just a reminder. We don't plan to bother them. We don't plan to sell them anything. We don't plan to sell their data to political parties or share their information with anyone. We don't need their social security number. So if that's a big, area of consideration for you, you can redact that before you send us stuff. We don't care, we don't need it. And then we don't require sole custody of the voter forms. So I know many groups are funded through other grant programs that might require copies of voter registration form. That's not going to be impacted by us also having the data. We don't mind if that's happening. And again, we're only using the data for research purposes. Next slide. So Ohio Votes, or ohvotes.org is our domain. It is our voter portal, and the benefits to using it are, it's a very simple interface, and it's designed to easily and quickly load on smart devices. So if you're like, and again, a lot of this advice and feedback is around the concept that we are allowed to see each other in person. But in theory, when folks are going around and checking people's voter registration en masse, they want to be able to do that quickly. This website allows that. Again, it's very simple interface, simple design. If you look it up on your phone, it's just, flat colors, nothing special or shiny, but that means that it loads quicker. We also can collect information so that we can send voters those updates I just mentioned. If they opt in, they don't have to provide that information, but if they like to receive those reminders, then they can. And then, as I mentioned, it allows us to track voting patterns. And then it also cross-references the voter files as well as the purge list. So if someone were to be on the at risk of being purged, they would actually be told that, yes, you're registered, but you should re-register because, your voter registration is a little bit on the edge there. Next slide. And this is just a picture of these interfaces just to show you what those look like. If you look up on your phone, this is what you're gonna see. The first screen is just check my voter registration, register, pledge to vote. Then once you click that, you're gonna go to this second middle page, which has your first name, your last name, your birth year, which is optional. However, is not optional anymore. This is an outdated graphic. That's what I meant to say. So the reason it's not optional anymore, and then county. And the reason that birth year is mandatory is because that way we can match it with a voter file and actually track the voting patterns of this person. Otherwise, we have 3/4 of the information, but just not enough to actually be able to use it in a research capacity. Just asking for that birth year allows us to do that. And then they can have their email address or phone number in case they would like to receive voting reminders. Also, we check for similar names. So if you have John with an H, it'll also check John without an H. We try to, and that's actually Ohio Voice who, comes up with those conventions, but they really try to do sound-alike spellings so that folks, who otherwise might not find their registration or find it buried or be registered and not even know it, hopefully can still locate their registration. Next slide. Okay, so important dates, April 28th, this Tuesday. August 4th, if needed, is a special election day. I don't know of any as of now, but if there were to be a race needed, then that would be the date of that special election. The big one that most people heard about, was it last year or 2 years ago? I can't even remember, but was the District 12 race with Danny O'Connor and the man who won. I can't think of his name right now. Oh, Saturdays. Okay, and then September 20th to 26th is National Voter Registration Week of Action. October 5th is the deadline to register. Troy Balderson, thank you. That was the name of the guy who won, who is currently an elected official. And then October 6th is when early voting starts, and November 3rd is Election Day. Next slide. And this is just my contact information if you have more questions. OH Votes I talked about. Ohio Voter Rights is the Voter Rights Coalition's website. And then this is the Ohio Votes, sort of organization level page, which we have some voting resources and some information about other voting programs. And then the voter hotline, this is for folks who might have questions or issues voting. This is the hotline that is nonpartisan. It's staffed by voting expert lawyers, and they can answer your questions or help you navigate the voting process as needed. And that is it.
Thank you. That was quite, that was quite informative and quite a lot of information.
Yeah, sorry.
And no, that's quite all right. And just to reassure folk that what I'll do is turn these slides into a PDF so that I'm able to send them to you. And you'd have these links on the PDF that you could bring up. And also I'll give you some key links as well that may have flown by just a little bit too fast. But this is going to take all of us working together. This is going to take all of us involved to make this push for democracy here in Ohio happen. And I'm going to flash once again how you can volunteer. I have a short URL to get to our Ohio Outreach Voter Committee page. That's the one here with the bit.ly/volunteer Ohio. Or you can just email me and I will direct you. info@uujo.org is mighty darn easy. And so you could email me and I will send you the various links you might need if you're having any trouble too. One thing I want to tell you about is that during this time of COVID and staying at home, we've been thinking about how are we going to start? How are we going to get going in terms of the voter work that we want to do? So we're doing community conversations right now. Susan and I are doing them. Chris Jones-Levy is starting them. Other people are being trained to do them. So we're doing community conversations around voter suppression and voting. But we also know that we've got processes of text banking that we just used for the primary, phone banking. We'd start with family, friends, coworkers, church congregants, and others that you may know and call and check their registration. And then we can branch out using other phone lists from Ohio Voice and others. We're going to be making sure that folk have correct information. This can all be done by phone, that they have access to information about statewide issues and candidates, and that can be given by phone as well. Sharing local issues, checking registrations, hold online conversations, with your friends and family about things or others. And then moving into registering people face-to-face when it's safe, or sending them hard copy registrations if they are unable to register by cell phone or by computer. I mean, these are some of the things we're thinking about right now. And the registration team and the education team will be talking about this as we get our heads out of the face-to-face kind of structure that we've always used and into how we can use the phones, cell phones, and online a little bit more. So that just gives you an idea that we're thinking about this stuff, right? I always end by asking folk, what are you going to commit to do right now? Talk to somebody, tell them about this, check your own registration, and will you volunteer to help with the voter outreach team? Because there's many different ways you can help. And I'll put that back up there. So, questions. Questions that you might have, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. That's probably the easiest way. We've already looked at some in the chat box. So what questions do you have for Susan, Reverend Susan, or other Susan, pardon me, Susan Leslie, or for Maria? I see one here. Any conversation on the general election being delayed? Do any of my panelists want to talk about that?
I have not heard word of anyone actually in a leadership capacity advocating for the delay of the election. That being said, we are hearing new fun voting by mail is, you know, a scam or fraudulent or whatever it might be. So we have been monitoring that closely, but we will continue to work on expanding vote by mail, which we hope it decreases the likelihood that someone's going to try to argue that we need to delay the election.
Okay.
I can just add the UUA is part of a national coalition called the Democracy Initiative, which is huge. I mean, it's like as big as the coalition that Maria is part of, except national. And people are fighting really hard to get $4 billion allocated in the next relief package to have secure, safe elections, expanded early voting, vote by mail. But people are really putting their heads together around this because vote by mail doesn't always work for historically disenfranchised communities. Organizers in Florida are telling us that somehow when Black and brown communities vote by mail, their votes don't always get counted. So it's taking that into consideration too, that, you know, and also for people with disabilities. So we need a combination of these things, but I'm seeing like an amount of collaboration. I mean, the AFL-CIO is in this organization, the Postal Workers Union, the Letter Carriers Union, along with all kinds of faith-based groups and democracy advocacy groups and organizers.
Yeah, and I ditto to what both Maria and what Susan said. I hear a lot of people in religious circles, in my religious circles, saying that they're very afraid that the federal government, or more specifically the president, is going to dismantle the post office by, you know, by the time of the election. And they say, well, what are we going to do? Of course, I don't know. I don't know any of that, but I keep talking to people to tell them that while the post office is still working, if you're worried that it's going to shut down, commit to voting by mail, you know, until we know that that's not safe to do. I mean, that's all I can do.
Got another question here. Are there any plans to purchase or obtain lists of young people to use to do voter registration outreach? I do know that on the registration team, we have a couple of high school teachers, civics teachers, who normally would be teaching their high school seniors right now about the necessity of registration. And they're concerned that we get out to the high school seniors who don't have that opportunity because they are doing classes online. But what other, Maria, what other ways can lists of young people be obtained to check with them?
Yeah, so I would say generally whenever you're talking about voter data, you are in the wheelhouse of Ohio Voice. They do a lot of our centralized 501c3 data management. So I would just say that, you know, we will have feedback, but they would be the real experts on what's possible, what are the pros and cons, what's the price, all of that. I do not intend to purchase any lists. I don't know that Joan intends to purchase any lists. That being said, we do intend to continue to grow our network of teachers, of student council presidents, of folks who are administrators at dropout high schools, to make sure that we close that knowledge gap and engage the youth as much as possible.
And we worked with Ohio Voice in getting the lists of voters and registered folk to remind them about the primary ballot by text, and then to follow up and text those who hadn't yet returned their ballots. So that came through Ohio Voice as well. Here's another question. What's the deal with the ACLU initiative, ballot initiative at this point? And how can we be involved? Maybe I should take that one. The ballot initiative for the safe and fair voting that would do, and would also do, you know, what they call motor voter. Whenever you were getting your license renewed, that kind of thing, you would be also able to update your registration, and some other voter protections rights, was stopped by the Ohio Committee on Petitions and ballot petitions. But then the courts overturned their objection and said that it could be one simple petition again, which is great, because the committee had wanted to divide it into 4 separate petitions, meaning you'd have to get 4 times as many signatures to get it on the ballot. Well, now it's back to being one ballot initiative. So we only have to get the one set of signatures. But we need a court order at this point to be able to collect signatures online or electronically in some way, shape, or form, or have them faxed or emailed. And that one is sitting in a court right now, and that's the last I heard. Maria, Susan, did you hear anything else on that?
That is my understanding of what's happening as well. And I did just kind of want to note the politics sort of at play right here is that, so the person that was the largest objector to this all being one ballot initiative was Larry Obhoff, who is the Senate president, Ohio Senate president. He is like a very, you know, he's a constitutional lawyer. He wants to be a judge. So his argument was that these were all different topics, and so they should be separated out. The judge, however, found that this was one topic because it all dealt with voter access. Politically, that's a really good thing to have happened because it really emphasizes that this isn't about the different, you know, pieces of these procedural matters. It's about the overall big picture voter access. So just a note about why this is not just helpful from the matter of this actually going through, but also it shows some political weight to the voter rights advocates.
Other questions, other comments? Oh, Susan, you're muted, hon.
Okay. I wanted to push again for us to show those movies / videos to groups of people, because when we talk about, you know, all this stuff, it's, you know, we know it to be true, but there's something about, we have an obligation to widen the base of people who really understand it. People will hear the words but not understand how serious this stuff is and how deep it is. So I'm just really going to push that we take some time and intentionally get groups of people together, young people, old people in between, because whenever they watch this stuff, I'm telling you, you can feel a shift in the room. And I think when we have the more shifts in the room that we have, the more we can increase our workforce, our work base, people willing to get on board and try to do the things that maybe they normally wouldn't have done because they don't understand how deep it is. I just really just needed to push that.
Now, Susan and I right now are offering these community conversations. Takes about 90 minutes, 2 hours, depending on how talkative people are. But we're also having other people trained to hold the community conversations to, you know, expand the questioning and make sure, help folk get deeper with it. But all watching it on your own is fantastic as well. But if you want a community conversation, let me know, because we are scheduling them around right now, and feedback response has been tremendous from folk. So those of you that have
people sign up on the spot because they're just so incensed. That's the thing. I think that we live in this place where our opponents, whoever they might be, count on us not being knowledgeable. But when we have the knowledge and we can push back, it's a game changer. So just wanted to share that.
Yep, and that's available to you.
Question?
Yeah.
If we have these videos and we get people signed up, I'm just kind of curious what specific actions are happening, obviously in the next 2-3 days, but also what's going to happen in the next month? What can we kind of focus folks toward? I guess this is probably directed at Maria. You know, I mean, getting them on the Slack channel, but I know a lot of things are maybe happening later in the summer, but it seems like there's a fair amount of coalition building and educational opportunities that we really shouldn't wait for. And I'm just curious what's happening in the next month specifically.
Yeah, so I guess what I would say is that this is an adjustment period for voter advocates and just everyone in the community. So for example, I know that a lot of the direct service and housing organizations that I work with are not thinking about voting right now. They have an influx in demand. They need extra money. They need extra help. Going up to them and saying, hey, you should be doing something else is not going to go over very well. So I have actually sort of been giving those organizations some space to adjust to their new reality and to some of the increase of need that they've developed. Because of that, I think now is the time to be really training up our volunteers and increasing the confidence of our volunteers. So making sure they know how to use Slack, but also then use it. Making sure that they know how to register voters, they know the common mistakes, they know what kind of things that are empowering to voters, what kind of things turn voters off, practicing these conversations so they're ready to have them, increasing their volunteer base, increasing their membership base, all of those things. So now is really the time to be recruiting, training, and educating our actual voter advocates, getting together educational material that we can push out closer to the election date to the actual voters. So I would say that generally our focus as of this stage for this next month will just be training up all of the people that are going to be engaged in this work, especially on all of the new tools that we're going to be needing to use and all of the new strategies that we're going to be needing to take. I know that myself, I'm working on a lot of new guidance materials for, you know, what counts as an activity, what are examples of online activities that you can do. All of these things. So that, you know, joining the subcommittees, meeting with the subcommittees, all of these things are things that people can be doing right now. And that are, if we if we want to do a good job in September, those are the things that we need to do now.
And in the registration committee, we'll also be teaching people how to hold the community conversations so that we're able to have those all over the state with small groups and large. We'll also be bringing our lists together, creating our lists of starting with family, friends, fellow congregants, co-workers, so that we can work with them in checking their registration and get use of the application and software and feel comfortable with it before we start in on other voter engagement lists. So that will be in. Other questions? Susan, Leslie, you said more people are picking up the phone. You want to make a comment here? This is good.
Yeah, we've been doing some phone banking into Georgia because they also have a postponed election coming up, and did that in Wisconsin. And I did a lot of phone banking in 2018, and we're seeing that the rate is higher. Maybe because people are just like, I want to talk to somebody, you know, being stuck at home. But also, I think people understand that this election is, I know, you know, I mean, I've heard people say so many times, this is the most critical election of our lifetime, but it's really true this time. And like in Wisconsin, people wanted to talk and they wanted to know about like other ways that they could drop off their ballot. So, and in Georgia, of course, they're very concerned about voter suppression. So I suspect you'll find that's the case in Ohio too. I know you've done texting so far, but probably your big coalition, Maria, Joan, and Susan, is also developing phone banking. So,
right, that's on the list.
People, Joan knows I have a few UUs that need to be called, so that's another opportunity for UUs on this call to start sharpening your phone banking skills. We have a script and form for you to fill out as you talk to people.
We actually have 5 volunteers already, and I see that all of them are on this call.
Fantastic.
So great.
I mean, that is one thing. I totally agree with you guys. Like, we can build our capacity and our skills and just try out some things. Man, when we can hit the streets, or if it's still going to be like we have to hit the phones, we can do it.
Other comments, questions, thingies? Okay.
I'd love to hear what
Then-
folks are doing.
Oh, just one other thing I wanted to say is a lot of UUs are doing the sending postcards to people. They're working with Vote Forward and Reclaim Our Vote, and people are also looking at their mail a bit more. But I'm also hearing that some folks are afraid to touch their mail. So part of the phone and texting is to say, if you're really afraid to touch it, I mean, you can touch it and wash your hands, but if you're really afraid to touch it, just let it sit there for 3 days and then open it.
Yeah, one of the tools that we were most excited to use might not even be something that we get to use this year, but it was going to be have people essentially fill out postcards to themselves that we could mail back to them closer to the election date. We have found pledge cards to be an effective use of, or like an effective tool to get folks to increase their likelihood of turnout. But with the communities that we work with and target, we found like, who are we? Why do they care about promising us that they're going to vote, right? So we have made it more that they're promising themselves. So I am working on trying to get a, visually appealing online pledge card that we can continue to allow folks to utilize that tool remotely. But, and it might just be an Action Network sheet, but I would really like it to be prettier than that and something that, they can feel like they're still filling this out to themselves. So just kind of to mention another tool that we'll have that is on the table.
And John Kachuba says he was pleased to see how easy it was to use Outvote, which is the app we used in the text banking for the primary. And thank you, John, for doing that work and volunteering. I know we do have a closing by Samuel, but I'll ask again if there's any other comments or questions. Carol. Did you have something, Carol?
Oh yeah, I was just curious, it's great to, maybe people could put it in the chat, what other activities they've been participating in, because I know that this is like an amazing crowd of already active activists. So I'd love to hear what other organizations or, you're doing Outvote app, who are you doing it through, and all everybody I'd love to hear what people are already working on.
How about if we put that in the chat, friends, and that way we'll have a record of that. So just please.
And I can say just one more that we did with Sunrise yesterday on virtual climate strikes. It's called Triple the Vote, and it's a relational app, and you can find it.
Great. Absolutely.
And that's just asking it. Yeah, and it's just like asking people to think of 3 people. I know UUs have a very high voter registration rate, but there may be someone that's struggling with depression who hasn't gotten it together to register, or may have been purged and doesn't know it, or a young adult moved home and now they're like, wait, which state am I registered in? And or just people who are like, oh my God, I can't stand technology. That might, just a little support, so that's the idea behind it.
Every time I've done some voter checking, even with the UU congregation, we will find folk that moved, have an incorrect name, let something lapse, or were purged, quite frankly. So you'll be surprised. Let's see, Susan, Leslie, is there any work underway in Kentucky?
The work I've heard about is that UUs are working with the Poor People's Campaign. They really dropped a rock on their foot in Kentucky when the spring mobilizations were going on last year. They banned the Poor People's Campaign from their state house, Kentucky, but it really backfired because then, the next day, even more people came. And so people are working with them. They were doing an on the ground voter registration drive, voter engagement there. And now they're shifting to digital mass meetings at the end of this month and the end of May. And you part of that.
Okay. Other questions?
If people could put the links as well as the sites, that'd be awesome.
See, the YWCA of Greater Cincinnati is focused on voter suppression as one of our racial justice foci. Thank you. There was also a question from Kathleen Gemeiner about food bank flyering via for food bank package pickup and distribution. I mean, UUJO has been involved with the food bank for the immigrant families that have been thrown out of work. And it was just yesterday when we had over 1,000 bags of non-perishable groceries that people drove by and picked up. And we'd been working with the teachers who know the families and invited the families that would need that, and also ESL teachers. But flyering, no. That was something the teachers were doing by phone call. Can you fully register online, or do you have to sign something and send it in? Ah, Maria, question.
You can fully register online if you have an Ohio ID. Currently, that is the only allowable voter ID that they use. So, especially when dealing with low-income communities, that is a bit of a hurdle because folks often don't have an Ohio ID. Slash license. So you can have an ID card or a license. Most people would think of it as a license, but you know, not everyone drives. But hopefully, and I don't know that it'll happen, but hopefully we'll continue to move towards a more expansive online registration, especially with this COVID stuff. Perhaps they'll allow the Social Security number to, you know, be a valid ID, but we'll see. So, but yes, you can
register. And it may be that if we're doing phone banking, we have to actually send a hard copy of a registration form to someone,
right.
With envelope and stamp attached.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Others? Before we close out with a prayer by Samuel. Okay. Samuel, I think you are on.
I think I'm going to ask if you could unshare your screen, if I could do that, and so that I could see these wonderful faces of everyone who are here. I want to say thank you. I want to say thanks to Joan. I want to say thanks to Carol and Edwin and Susan and Maria Bruno. This is the first time I've ever sat through something with you, and I appreciate it. I love it. I mean, I don't want this to actually end, but it's got to come to an end. You know, thank you. A couple of years ago, I took an organizing course, well, an organizing training, and the acronym they used was FWFWFLFH. Fight, win, fight, win, fight, lose, fight harder. And I just love that. I mean, it's the spirit in which we all can have, it's the spirit in which we all can share in. So I will leave you with this. I will leave you with this reading here. It's from the American Youth Laureate, and her name is Amanda Gorman. I thought I'd awaken to a world in morning, heavy clouds crowding, a society storming, but there is something different on this golden morning, something magical in the sunlight, wide and warming. I see a dad with a stroller taking a jog across the street, a bright-eyed chases her dog, a grandma on a porch, fingers her rosary. She grins as her young neighbor brings her groceries. While we might feel small, separate, and alone, our people have never been more closely tethered. The question isn't if we will weather this unknown, but how we will weather this unknown together. So on this meaningful morning, we mourn and we mend, like we can't be broken even when we are bent. As one, we will defeat this despair and this disease. We stand with healthcare heroes, with all employees, with families, with libraries, with school, with waiters, with artists, with businesses, with restaurants and hospitals hit hard. We ignite not in the light, but in the lack thereof. For if in the loss that we truly learn to love, in this chaos, we will discover clarity. In suffering, we must find solidarity. For if our grief that gives us our gratitude, show us how to find hope. If we ever lose it, to ensure that this ache wasn't endured in vain, do not ignore the pain. Give it purpose, use it. Read children books, dance alone to a DJ music. Know that this distance will make our hearts grow fonder. From a wave of woes, our world will emerge a whole lot stronger. We'll observe how the burdens braved by humankind are also the moments that makes us humans kind. Let every dawn find us courageous, bring us closer, heeding the light before this fight is over. And when it ends, we will all smile sweetly, finally seeing in testing times we can become the best of who we are. Thank you all.